This is HinduLounge, a live weekly show on contemporary American Hindu issues hosted by Ajay Shah and Utsav Chakrabarti. Namaste Utsavda.
Namaste Ajay Bhai, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Utsavda. This is HinduLounge episode number 8.
Yes.
And just to introduce everyone, this is HinduLounge. HinduLounge is a show, a Facebook live show where we talk about the contemporary Hindu American issues or American Hindu issues. We come live every Sunday at 11 o'clock Eastern, barring some technical difficulties. So we may be off by 10 or 15 minutes every week because we are still in a incubation phase in some ways. So there are always these teething problems that come up, but we are trying to overcome them. But so that we are, we are always live. So I want to introduce Utsavda for those who have not met Utsavda before and who have just joined us. Utsavda is Utsav Chakrabarti. He is the Director of Awareness and Advocacy for World Hindu Council of America. And I am Ajay Shah. I'm the Executive Vice President for Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America or World Hindu Council of America. And we come together every week and we generally talk about issues that are important to Hindus in America. But this week, Utsavda, we are going to do something a little different. What we are going to do this time is that we are going to invite our viewers to participate in this show. So please, participate by posting your comments and posting your questions. And as you post the questions, and we will read your comments out, and we will we'll acknowledge you, and we will also answer the questions the best we can. We will also read your comments out on this show. So I can already see that Shivna Singh has joined and said hi to us. I can see that Vandana Tiwari Sharma has joined us. So as we are starting out, more and more people are joining, and they are making they're posting something on our timeline. So I want to welcome them, and I want to welcome everyone else. So let me start out with the news of the week. I mean, and in America, there is no bigger news than what we talked about last week, which is the killing of George Floyd by the police officer. It's almost, in a broad daylight. He basically choked George Floyd to death in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. And that was a really tragic event. So, it just exemplifies in many ways police brutality, certainly not reflective of all the law enforcement officers, certainly not reflective of all the good work that the police does in many in protecting the people. But this particular act also signifies that this is not the only time that a black male essentially was murdered in broad daylight by the police, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to talk about it, and we have to present a Hindu perspective on it. And as we are acknowledging the people who are joining live, I can see that Mahendra Sapa has also joined on live. And for those who are just joining us, there's a new feature in the show now. We are acknowledging the people who are joining live. We are reading out their comments. We're going to read out their comments. We are going to answer their questions and all of that. So once again, we are talking about, so the topics for today, we're going to talk about George Floyd. We are going to talk about his killing and the aftermath. We are also going to talk about an issue which is very, in many ways related, and in many, many, many ways it's not related. And that is, is there a lot of people have, as a result of this George Floyd tragedy, a lot of people have come and said, hey, look, Hindus are no different. They're killing people of certain caste and things like that. And there have been a lot of comments about it. So we are actually going to talk about caste in America along with that. So does it exist? What are the origins of caste system, if there is one, and does it exist in America, and what kind of impact caste has in America? And we will have our two regular features, the Hindu Seva Act of the week, and the most anticipated feature of all, as always, we are going to talk about Hindu hater of the week. So that I want to, uh, let's start with George Floyd, killing. Right? It's very tragic. We all acknowledge that there has been, in many ways, for several centuries, there has been race-based discrimination in America, and we acknowledge that, and we also acknowledge that uh, more progress needs to be made. And I think it that is not to say that they're not good people. I think there are vast majority of people respect people's diversity. Vast majority of the people respect inclusion. Vast majority of the people recognize that we have to come together under some universal principles of um, you know uh, of harmony. Almost it's what we envision in Hindu dharma. We said vasudhaiva kutumbakam. The entire universe is one family, and entire universe has to live regardless of outward differences as one unified family. And there's also a very famous Indian poet, a Hindu poet, who said that a true Hindu is the one who feels the pain of others. And in this particular case, as true Hindus, we feel the pain of those who have been discriminated against and those who have been marginalized. So I turn over to you, and you made some very good comments when it came to when we issued a press release. So please, uh, please, go ahead and opine on this topic.
Thank you, Ajay bhai, for that generous introduction. And the last couple of weeks have been, as most of us know, have been very tragic in the sense that George Floyd was killed, and and there was an eruption of emotion across America, and that brought into focus some of the issues that have been confronting us. And when I say us, it's across humanity, about race based discrimination, about how humans look at each other, who are different, and different because how they look different, how they are from different places, uh, the color of their skin. So so this is something that is centuries old. I mean, it's as old as humanity itself, and we have to address it. We have been addressing it over the centuries, but now is the time where, through modern means of communication, through better understanding and better interaction amongst communities, we can address these differences. And I personally feel, at some point of time, respect differences rather than trying to make everybody the same. So that's where the whole effort, in my opinion, should be, where differences are respected and there is a mutual understanding and respect for each other. So so with that, I think we have to approach the issue, and that's what I have been advocating, and I think that's what Hindu dharma advocates. It's about respecting differences and respecting diversity, not trying to make everybody the same. It can never happen. It just makes the world a blander place. uh, so yeah, that's been the focus that I have been trying to push forward. And I think the topic that you brought up today is race and caste. It's something that is very relevant for us to address, because every society has its divisions, and Hindus, being the third largest religious community and the oldest religious community in the world, uh, have had their own baggages throughout the centuries that have been real or perceived, and some have been addressed, and some are being addressed, and some are going to be addressed in the future. So this is something that comes up again and again. And in the American context, caste has been brought up. So I'm glad that you brought this topic up, and maybe we should dive right away into it and discuss the history and the realities and the misconceptions and the misrepresentations that are associated with this topic.
So that before we start on this, I want to acknowledge a few people who have commented and who have joined our conversation today. Mahendra Sapa, who we just said has joined, and he has said, Namaste. What would you say to fellow Hindus that never raise any concern on Palghar lynching or kidnap and conversion of Hindu girls in Pakistan? And I think so while you comment on that and answer Mahendraji's question, I want to also acknowledge that Sanjay Jingan, K. Prakash Singh, and Sneh Bhaskar Giri have also joined, and I want to welcome all of them. And so has Abhishek Bhattacharya, and he says amazing words. And so please, if you can address, before we move on to our main topic, if you can address Mahendra Bhai's comments.
Well, Namaste, Mahendraji, and thank you for your question. I think what you mentioned about discrimination against and forced conversion of Hindus in many parts of the world, especially with the theocratic states, Islamic states, this is a larger issue. We talk about it in other HinduLounge programs, and I will. All I can say is that this is something that is theologically and historically ingrained in some belief systems. It is almost a reward. It comes with a reward either in this life or in some perceived afterlife. And once that is the way of approaching a belief system, a religion, then average person, a common person, is encouraged to do the discrimination. He may be a good person as an individual, but if the belief system incentivizes discrimination, forced conversion, it will happen. And Hindus, being the ancient native population of what is present day Pakistan, it used to be for thousands of years, it used to be Hindu and Buddhist land. They are easy targets because they usually are economically deprived and usually come from communities that do not have a strong voice. And the fact that many people do not talk about it, many advocates on social issues in America and in other parts of the world who raise voices on social conflicts and have comments on that, don't mention these things, shows where their money comes from sometimes, and also shows who their ideological patrons are. And at the end of the day, we acknowledge what things they are, how they are, and we do our best to address them. And that's why we are here, and that's why we are talking about it.
Thank you. So that just want to acknowledge two more people have joined, and if people are just joining us, we are this time we are for now our 8th week, so we're introducing a new feature where we are acknowledging people who are joining us on Facebook Live, and we are also reading out their comments. So I want to acknowledge Vishal Shah and Paddu Govindaraj, who have just joined us. And Mahendra ji has one more question about how different are we or our challenges from Native Americans. So Mahendra ji, hold on to that thought. We will come to it because these are really important questions you are raising, and maybe we can acknowledge some of these questions as we unfold today's topic, which is we are going to talk about caste and America. So I also want to acknowledge a question that has come from Akshat Chaturvedi, and it says some religious ideologies incentivize religious conversion, and it says, well said, Utsav Chakrabarti. So Utsada, and a recognition for what you just said, and I think what you said is absolutely spot on. So let me just dive into the topic that we have for today and see if we can trigger a broader conversation with all the people who are logged into and watching us live, and for people who are going to listen to us on or watch us on YouTube when we post this video at the end of the day. So that the topic for today is a really interesting one. We are going to talk about race and caste, and we started out with, because one of the reasons we picked this topic, so that is because a lot of people have said there's a segment of people in America who want to put in for non-Hindus, they want to make caste consumable, if you will, and they they want to say that, look, caste is not a race. Racism and casteism are the same thing, and casteism is even worse because casteism is based in Hindu philosophy. Casteism has sanction of Hindu scriptures, and that is why the only real way is to abandon Hindu dharma if you want to have equality. Okay, so follow the logic here. What they are trying to tell people is that, look, you are against racism, which is discrimination, persecution, etc., based on race. But look, in India, out there is casteism, and that casteism has been imported to America, and casteism is actually much worse. The casteism is much worse because it is based on birth, it is based on a religious sanction, and because it is based on religious sanction, what we need to do is abandon that faith, abandon that religion, and that is the only way to get rid of casteism. Okay, because it has a scriptural sanction.
Correct.
So
And that
go
is a
ahead.
topic, that has been in the play for a long time. It has been in the play for, I would say, more than century, more than two centuries at least, in modern times of recorded, when we record stuff that has happened in the past 200 years very well. The interesting thing is that the very people who say that, for 99% of the period that they have actually said this, is also the time where they themselves sanctioned slavery, and they were very okay with it. In fact, they promoted it, and some of these people, these church groups, were profiting from the slave trade 200 years ago, or 300 years ago. So there is a vested interest in that. There is an agenda in that, but that does not take away from what they are addressing, which is where we come in, and we have to address the issue they are bringing up. So first thing we have to note is that the word caste itself is never mentioned in Hinduism. Hindu dharma, in any Hindu scripture, any Hindu, major scripture, the Shrutis and the Smritis, the word caste never shows up. In fact, it is one of the words that has been imported to the Indian subcontinent with colonialism. It came with the Portuguese. It basically comes from the Portuguese word castas, which actually means race. So the word itself is a colonial imposition on the Indian subcontinent. And the word Dalit, interestingly, was also imported by the Christian missionaries, and it was first used in the 1830s in missionary schools, in the Scottish missionary schools. So both these words that depict a certain anathema of the Hindu society are actually words that came from Europe during the colonial times and were relevant to racist narratives. So the word itself is it destroys itself once you look into the root of it. What these guys have been talking about, and what we should be talking about, is Varna and Jati. And I think there has been a lot of interesting work done on that, and I would encourage all Hindus. I know most Hindus are not very well read on our scriptures, especially, we should do a poll about trying to figure out what percentage of Hindus actually know the difference between Shrutis and Smritis, or for that matter, even know what Shrutis and Smritis are. So once we do a small dive into our own scriptures, we find that it's Varnas and Jatis that are being discussed throughout history. And it is these terms that we need to dive deeper into and understand better.
So let us I think I lost your audio. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So
Okay.
let me start by defining the Varna. Right? You mentioned Varna, so let's define Varna. So Varna actually Varna means color, but it's not the color of the skin. And Varna and Sanskrit defines varna very clearly as a personality trait, or in Sanskrit it would be called, in later thought in Sanskrit it is called gunas. Okay, it is not color of the skin, and it is basically guna, or your personal traits or your personal characteristics. It are the inherent human qualities. So varnas are, it means you help someone understand your own personal traits. It has nothing to do with birth, so that these are the traits that lead you to do your karma according to the traits, according to qualifications, according to your what you're going to be good at. Okay, and it doesn't say that one varna, there are four of them, and we all know them. They're the Brahmins, the Kshatriya, the Vaishyas, the Shudras. No Hindu scripture, not the books of law, but no Hindu scripture says that one is higher than the other or one is better than the other. Okay? And the ancient rishis, the scholars or the social scientists at the time, basically analyzed the patterns of inherent human qualities, and they came up with these characterization or classification. Observational. In fact, the Purusha Sukta, the oldest Hindu scripture is Rigveda. And in Rigveda, in Purusha Sukta, it says, and there is a hymn which says that the entire universe in form of a human being is a cosmic person called the Purusha. The human order, social order, is based on that. Again, it does not say anywhere in Rigveda that a Brahmin is at higher social order than the other. It just says these are the four personality traits. In fact, if you study this further, it also says that because these four varnas represent the qualities of energy that all people naturally possess, a same person can have multiple traits and can simultaneously belong to multiple varnas. Okay, and it implies that just as multiple limbs in your body have multiple specialized functions, or multiple organs in your body have multiple specialized functions, the four varnas have specialized functions. It does not say one organ is better than the other. Okay, there's no such thing as saying that your heart is more important than your liver, is more important than your brain. All varnas are needed. It's observational, and you can possess characteristics from all varnas based on your characteristics. It's nothing to do with the birth. That is the Rigvedic interpretation. Bhagavad Gita says in chapter 18, verse 42, that tranquility, it says that, O Arjuna, I'm sorry, verse 41, it says, O Arjuna, the activities of the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudras are clearly divided according to the qualities born of their own nature. It does not say born on your father's nature. It does not say born on your mother's nature. It says born of their own nature. It does not mention birth anywhere. And Bhagavad Gita 18:42, chapter 18, verse 42 says, tranquility, restraint, austerity, purity, patience, integrity, knowledge, wisdom, and belief in hereafter. These are the intrinsic qualities of the work of work for Brahmins. Again, does not mention father or mother or birth. It says your individual characteristic. So, Utsoda, I want you to comment on that. But before I go there, I want to also read out some of the comments that we have been getting on Facebook Live. As you know, this is Hindu Lounge, episode number 8. We are talking about caste is race, caste, and especially caste in America. And as we are progressing towards caste in America, we are first defining what caste is, and we have already established that caste and varna are two different things. So Rishi Bhatnagar has commented that's so true. Hardly any Hindus know the difference between dharma and religion as well. And then Akshat Chaturvedi says, people with casteist mindset are increasingly diminishing due to Indian constitution and urbanization. Question is, why, when the caste-based discrimination is not part of the Indian theology or sacred scripture, still a thing in Indian society, regardless of the religion? That's an excellent question. I think down the line we are going to talk about it a little bit. But please, I welcome your comment uh, on the definition and the scriptural aspect of varna that we just talked about, and then we'll move on to the other concept, which is jati. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ajay bhai, and thank you for bringing up the Purusha Suttas, because the sad part is that I don't think in modern times any Hindu, again, it's unfortunate, but most Hindus have never read the Rig Veda. I think more Hindus have read the Bhagavad Gita and Purusha Sutta. I mean, there is no more canonical scriptures among the Hindus than the Vedas. And I'm using terms that are relevant to the Western audience. Canonical is not a Hindu term; it's a Judeo-Christian term, but that's how we speak English, so I'm using that word. So yeah, if Rig Veda clearly talks about it, and it's not just the scriptures, the core shrutis that talk about varnas in their purest form without any birth-based reference. It's also that if you see the Hindu society, or when I say Hindu, it translates to Hindu, Buddha, and Jaina traditions as well. From the early part of the common era and as well as pre-common era period, around 3rd century common era and 5th century during the Gupta Empire, because in modern history books of India, the Gupta Empire is somehow presented as the representative of the Hindu revivalism in the Indian subcontinent, and the flag bearer of Hinduism, Hindu Dharma in the modern times, the golden age of the Indian subcontinent. So, I mean, there are two Chinese travelers who I'm going to refer here, and one of them is Fa Hin, who came during Chandragupta Vikramaditya's time. It's around 4th century, 5th century Common Era, and he being a Buddhist himself, so he was Buddhists always had this, the Buddha traditions had this, philosophical back and forth and philosophical tussle with the dharmic Hindu traditions. So he was not like a real fan of different Hindu philosophies. He was always opposing them philosophically, not physically, I must remind. So Fa Hin, a Chinese traveler, actually writes in detail about the jatis and the varnas during Chandragupta Maurya's time. And one thing he mentions very clearly is that inter-varna marriage, I'm not using the word inter-caste, because caste, as we have established, is a Portuguese term for a race that was imposed on us in the 17th century. The inter-varna marriage during Fa Hin's time under Chandragupta Maurya, Chandragupta Vikramaditya, was very common. It used to happen across the platform, across all varnas. And similarly, there was also mobility within these different varna groups. So somebody who could be, by tradition, a quote-unquote Vaishya, could have the skills of a warrior and would be a warrior if needed, and would become a Kshatriya. And this has happened across history. I mean, there were jatis who became Kshatriyas because they played important role in wars. And there would be specific wars and specific invasions where they would actually transition across the Varna traditions. Entire jatis would do that. Similarly, Huan Shang, who came 200 years after Chandragupta Vikramaditya during Raja Harshvardhana's time, also clearly mentions, he came around 7th century Common Era, and he also mentions about this lateral movement among the different Varnas and the mobility across Varnas. So intermarriage and mobility across varnas. So this modern understanding of caste that we made to believe, and by the 16th, 17th century we had been colonized for so long that we were literally like subjugated and subjugated, that these uh, social divisions took deep root because of the way we were looked down upon ourselves as a community. So this translated within the community as well. So I also just wanted to bring some historical references of people who were looking at the Hindu society from outside, not from within, and therefore they had a more neutral observation of it.
Yeah. So that's well said. And for people who are just joining us, this is Hindu Lounge episode number 8, and with Utsav Chakravarti and Ajay Shah. And today we are talking about George Floyd's killing, and the broader discussion that is taking place in some quarters about racism and caste in America. And this time, unlike our other past programs, we're actually acknowledging people who join, and we are also taking questions and answering the questions from our viewers. I know that we still owe Akshat Chaturvedi an answer, but Utsoda, before we go there, that's a really good question that we should address. And just to remind you, the question is, why, when the caste-based discrimination is not part of the Indian theology or sacred scriptures, still a thing in Indian society regardless of religion? I am going to answer that question next, but I want to, as continuity, I just wanted to kind of read out a question that a couple of other questions that have come. One of them is from Abhishek Bhattacharya, and he says a lot of people who raise their thoughts in social media also may not be well read about Hindu Dharma, but also shy themselves from self-identity of ourselves as Hindus. Is this because of lack of knowledge about our Dharma? And then Pushpita Prasad writes that, is there a good, reliable reference to writings of these travelers online? So, Utsada, before we go to the other two, why don't you answer Pushpita Prasad's question, because you just mentioned the two Chinese travelers, and maybe you can talk about the references, or you can, after this show ends, you can post that on our Facebook page, so that people who have interest in this to explore further, they can go to that. The other two questions are interesting. So, do you want to quickly refer to some references, or are you going to post them?
I think all I can say is Fahin's work is referenced online, so you just need to Google, and you will find references on different sources. I actually got translations of his work in English from a gentleman named James Leggy. So I can post the link online. But Fahin is very well known, and we can post the link in our in the message section of this live.
Okay. Thank you, Soda. So before we answer the other two questions, let's talk about Jati. So Jati is, so we defined the concept called Varna, and now we will define the concept called Jati. Now, Jati is something that is based on birth. Jati is family, extended family, your, people who are your extended relatives, all of that. And a lot of the it is not based on any of the qualities. It doesn't have any scriptural sanction. It is not based on dharma. In fact, all religions in South Asia have follow the have jatis. Okay. And
I would make a quick correction to that. I think all societies had jatis and will always have jatis. You go to Japan, you go to China, so it's not just South Asia or the Indian subcontinent. Any society that involved generation-based work traditions, farming, specific farming of certain crops, specific skill sets in ironsmithing, in building, in any profession where there was an apprenticeship project involved, whether it's construction, whether it's metalwork, and that was across Europe, that was across all ancient societies. Every generation had apprentices where they learned the skills and trades, and that carried on generation after generation. That is literally jati.
And you're absolutely right, so that I stand corrected on that. I've also, this is what happens when you're doing live show, because some of these things, you try to say it in a certain way, it comes out in a different way. Thank you very much for correcting. You're absolutely right. And a lot of it, Utsoda, and please, I want to hear your opinion. A lot of these class based or birth based professions became institutionalized because there was a lack of mobility in terms of profession because of lack of opportunities, right?
Correct. And that's why a couple of minutes ago I brought up the issue of colonization of the Hindu societies for 1,000 years. Under such social trauma that Hindu societies faced, not just the Hindus, but the religions which were imposing themselves on Hindus and the Hindus who were converting into them also had this social trauma. And that led to a lack of mobility within the social orders, because somebody else is sitting on top of you who doesn't consider themselves to be part of you, and they're ruling you for 1,000 years. We can go into who those people are later. And then you start freezing your social status, and each social status starts becoming its own identity, and that is pretty self-destructive, which is what we faced over the last couple of centuries. And it's also natural. It came in every society. It is very common in across religions. Even if you see a marriage advertisement in Lahore, Pakistan, it's rather funny. It will be talking about whether the bride is a Sunni or a Shia, and then it will describe whether they are a Punjabi speaking Rajput or a Punjabi speaking Baniya, and that's part of the marriage. So it's across religions. And if you look at the Christian community in India, especially in southern part of India, they won't even allow the burial of somebody from one jati who is a Christian in the burial ground of another jati Christian. So that is it's unfortunate, it's sad, but it is real.
So thank you. So that is very well said. And I, again, as for people who are just joining in, this is Hindu Lounge, episode number 8. We are talking about George Floyd and his killing, a brutal killing. And we are talking about racism, and specifically as it pertains to American Hindu community. We are talking about a lot of discussion that has happened about the last couple of years about caste in America. And we are actually, this time we are doing things a little differently. From this show onwards, we are acknowledging the people who join our Facebook Live, and we are also taking questions or comments that come online. So Utsuda, as new people join, I'm reading out their names. And I see that Dina Budhia has just joined us on Facebook Live, and I want to acknowledge her joining. So welcome. And so is Nitin Surti has also joined, and I want to acknowledge Nitin Surti's joining as well. So welcome. And as I said, this is we are talking about race and caste in America and the implication. And we started the topic for those who have just joined us by introducing. We first commented on George Floyd's killing, and then we talked about racism, and then we are starting to talk about caste. And what we are tracing the history of how caste came about. We talked about varna, which is the actual Hindu concept, varna as a scriptural sanction. We talked about jati, which is family, extended family, and profession, that got ingrained based on birth. And what we are now going to talk a little bit more about the effect of colonialism on the jati, varna, and caste overall. How the three terms interplayed as time went on. Again, the reason we are discussing that is because there's an insinuation out for last at least 2-3 years in America that you're not a racist, but look, you're a Hindu, and Hindus have caste, and caste have religious sanction. And so only way you can free yourself from not being a racist or casteist is to denounce your faith and your scriptures. But what we are saying here, and with scriptural references, is that varna, which is the actual Hindu concept, has no sanction, is not birth based, it says that a person can simultaneously have multiple varnas. It is based on a personality trait, and it really has no sanction of discrimination of one varna versus other, because it is a same person can have multiple varnas, and it is not based on it is not a mode on where or method by which you discriminate other person. Okay. I want to acknowledge Sanjay Shah, who has just joined us as well. And for so that I want to extend that, right, and I want to extend this to how the word caste came to India. So all the people who are from Indian subcontinent, I know Hindu dharma is much larger than people just from Indian subcontinent, but let's put this in context of Indian subcontinent. And in 1885, there was a war of independence that Indians fought against British, and British almost lost that war. But at that time, British realized that, look, if we want to really rule this country, we really need to understand what unites this country in what ways. And that colonialist mindset combined with the evangelical mindset that let's win the souls, let's convert people to Christianity, those two came together. And that collusion between the two, the colonialism and propagation of evangelism, led to a lot of things. The most important one of them was uh, taking these Hindu concepts and recasting them in a different light, and making the colonialized people think that they are inferior. So one person stands out in this, and that is Risley. So Risley was a British administrative officer who eventually became, a surveyor, who eventually became anthropologist. But and he has been, he actually ran the first surveys in India. And what he did was he created. I mean, he did a lot of things that in today it has been called scientific racism. Okay? And the way he propagated scientific racism, was he took like 100 people out of 300, 400 billion people all over India at that time, a sample size of 30 to 100, and he looked at the sizes of the nose and color of the skin, and he started dividing people and the only thing he really knew was the European model, and he started putting people and fitting them in European model. So he knew race, he knew tribe, and he knew nation, and that's all he knew. But when people all belong to the same race, and they all belong to the same big country, follow the same traditions, this really the only way he could think of classifying them is now caste. Okay, so he took varna and jati and put everyone in caste. At the 14th and 15th century mindset of colonialization. And Utsoda, he went around and he found every single jati, and we already defined jati. They took this jati, okay, and he started classifying them into caste, a Portuguese concept, okay, and then Utsoda, he went and told people that this is your caste. Okay, so the people, in fact, he even wrote that the people in India are so ignorant that they don't even know what their own caste is. Okay, remember the caste, the varnas were not even based on birth, and jati indicated extended families. And now you tell them that, hey, what is your caste? You have to tell them what their caste is, because nobody knows what their caste is. No, there's no such word as caste in India. There are two different concepts. One is religious, one is based on your family, extended family, profession, whatever. And he is now going around telling people what their caste is. And every 10 years, he's surveying them as part of the census. And now the caste is becoming more and more ingrained in India, starting in 1885. So that before I take your comment, I just want to tell people who are joining us that from this time onwards, we are acknowledging people who join us. We are introducing them, and we are taking their questions and their comments online. So I want to acknowledge Neelam Jaiswalji, who has just joined us. Welcome. And as more and more people join, we'll acknowledge them. I know that Akshat Chaudhary has another question, and we'll come to that question. So the Risley's theory and your comments.
Well, I think Risley was doing it because he had the mandate to be the next colonizer. So, you know, he came to a subcontinent that had been colonized 700 years already, and he looked at it from a Eurocentric racial narrative, and he had to impose administrative device division that he needed to do. So he did what he knew best, and he did it with the sole intention of being the ruler. That's what colonizers do. He divided the society, ensured that there is a high and a low that he can work with, and as long as he maintained those fault lines in the society, he would be winning. And they did. I rule for the next 100 years, more than 100 years. So it is not unfathomable. It is something that was very Eurocentric, and that's why the word caste, Portuguese word caste for race, was introduced in the Indian subcontinent. But we also need to see that Europe itself had different notions of race in that time. And for another day, we have to bring up how they wanted to divide the world between superior race versus an inferior race, and they were very confused when they got to India and had to somehow put a template on the Indian subcontinent, on the at that time like 500 million people who lived here 200 years ago, huge section of the world population. They had to impose their European race theory templates, which all of them have been proved to be wrong based on now genetic study of how humans migrated across the world. And in those days, it was primarily the study was done on the basis of language. So that's a whole different show. But what my point is that Risley was doing what any colonial power would do. And was not the first time it was being done on the Indian subcontinent. There were previous Islamic rulers who did the same thing. And I think that's again, we have to divide these conversation. I don't want to mix other topics with this. So that's my point.
So that I don't think that anyone here would say that Indian society or Hindu society has been perfect. There were a lot of there are discrimination. People did look down upon other people if they were not in a certain profession. What the point we are making is that none of this really had religious or scriptural sanction.
Ajay bhai, I wanted to bring something up that will come up and is always brought up by our detractors. That's Manusmriti, and that is something that I wanted to clarify before we go any further,
Yes.
because we are running out of time as well. So I just want to make sure that people understand what a Smriti is. And even though Manusmriti was given a lot of importance again during the British colonial times, uh, it is something that is a Smriti by nature is time bound. It is an interpretation of the scriptures, not the scriptures themselves. And I think again, this is something that all Hindus need to know. There's a difference between Shrutis and Smritis, and Manusmriti, by the very nature of it being a Smriti, is not across time. It has its purpose for maybe 100 years, 200 years, but it is time bound. It's analysis of the scriptures, not scriptures themselves. And by its very nature of being a Smriti, doesn't stay relevant in modern times.
It is a book of law.
It's a book of law.
For a given time. I want to acknowledge a couple of other things, right? And that is, so as we said that, look, I mean, we are not going to say that Indian society was perfect. There were people who were oppressed. people who were suppressed, people who were based on birth, and it had nothing to do with religion or Hindu faith, Hindu culture. It had to do more with, um, it had to do more with the way the class system across the world originated and worked. Mahatma Gandhi used the word Harijan, and what he meant by that was that everyone, it's the people who have been discriminated against are all children of God. And the word Dalit was actually meant ground, people who are suppressed, ground, crushed, broken into pieces, and it was used by Victor Premasagar. Not to say that people have not been suppressed and all of that. And I think that what Mahatma Gandhi did was very unique, and we are going to talk about. And I see a question that has come up, and we are going to talk about what what has happened to Mahatma Gandhi in American context. As we are acknowledging all the people who are joining, we are running out of time, but uh, we we have a couple of questions that have come, but I want to acknowledge everyone who is joining. We have a few minutes, and one of the questions that has come, um, one of the suggestions that has come is from Mahendra Bhai Sapa. He is saying this is a very wide and very important topic, and maybe dividing into multiple sessions could help more. And point well taken. We will be doing that. And Gaurangji Vaishnav, who has said that, so can you tell us what parts of Manusmriti are relevant today and which part are irrelevant? And that is a question that we should definitely tackle in a future program. It is extremely important, but I don't know if we can do justice to a complicated topic like that today. I want to I want to, as I was saying, that we do need to acknowledge uh, the the social aspect of things, as opposed to, and we have already said that no religious sanction, and I keep repeating this because that is really critical junction, important point and critical point to make, because people are using caste to say that, look, renounce, the only way to renounce casteism is to renounce your Hindu faith. And what we are trying to say is that you do not have to renounce your Hindu faith, because varna is not based on birth. There is no sanction for discrimination against Varna in any Hindu scripture. Scripture, okay.
Ajay bhai,
Not
I'll be blunt here. Those who say that the only way to renounce caste is to renounce your Hindu faith are the ones who have separate burial grounds for people from one caste compared to the burial ground from converts to Christianity from other castes. So let me be clear about who these people are. You may not want to be saying it because you are very polite, but I will say that.
So and we are just getting into that, but I want to just one thing I want to say, and these are the words of Professor Bar Apte, who was the president of Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, the largest student organization in India. And he said that any movement, like Hindu movement, that continues to be identified with higher classes, even though the ground reality is different, in fighting the falsehood is spread by the left, we unconsciously appear to be holding a brief for a hierarchical society. So we are not. I just want to make clear that, consistent with what Professor Apte has said, we are not going to hold a brief for hierarchical society. And then he goes on to say, going into the theory of sociology, we find a virtue in caste. And again, I want to make absolutely clear that in this show, as individuals, as an organization, we want to distinguish caste and varna. And and the caste as a word that is used today, we find in any time, basically caste is not even a Sanskrit word, Hindu word, it is an imposed word, and we find absolutely no virtue in the word caste. Okay, this, but we also have to be cognizant, especially people who believe in Hindutva or Hindu way of life, have to be, and I'm using Professor Apte's word, this direct or indirect support for caste system helps the opponent's aspirations, um, or and gives them a credence that we follow some regressive system.
Correct.
And we want to make sure that we, as Hindu activists, we should not forget the distinction between social and political discourse on the one hand and academic and historical discourse on the other. So we have to acknowledge that there are people in the Indian society that have faced historically that they have been discriminated against, especially in past 200 years when the caste was introduced. Utsoda, I I know you're going to say something next, but please combine what you're going to say next with the caste and the some of the anti-caste movement that is taking place in America. Because so that I've been here for decades, and I've lived on campuses for 10 years, and I have never come across people talking about other person's caste. So what is going on in America? So please finish your thought on the previous topic about what Professor Apte said, and then please tell us why this all of a sudden this attack on Hindus in America based on caste.
Well, Ajay bhai, there are the Hindus used to be less than 1 million for most of the last 20th century in America. Now Hindus are 4 million in America. You are Hindu Americans are a relevant section of the electorate, and when the electorate is getting divided along racial lines, which is very popular in America nowadays. It's been always been the case in America. It's a society that has strong racial fault lines. It was just a matter of time when the 4 million Hindu Americans would also be attempted. There would be attempts made to divide them along these perceived fault lines. And when you have Christian missionaries trying to do that in the Indian subcontinent for last 300 years, what stops them from attempting the same in America, where there are far more, the Christian right wing is far more stronger and has far more resources? It was just a matter of time that this would happen. And what you are saying, that you lived in campuses for 10 years. I went to grad school here. I saw society. I still interact with people. Caste is never an issue amongst the youth in America. There are social groups that are often based on linguistic groups, cultural groups, people who speak a certain language tend to come together. It's like how South American society, when they come to America, somebody who's a Puerto Rican has a certain cultural lifestyle, somebody who is a Colombian or a Cuban or Argentinian, they all, gel together within their sub groups, sub identities, but they're not always in aggression to each other. Similarly, I think it's even less amongst the Hindu Americans. Hindu Americans may have a Marathi, Bengali, Punjabi, you name it, Sindhi. They have different linguistic groups that form and gel together as sub-identities, but caste is never the driving factor amongst them. It's never been the case and never visible to me. But now this is going to be imposed because that's a fault line that Christian right wing can exploit. And when they have attempted to do that in the Indian subcontinent for decades, and they have succeeded in converting people. I mean, when you want to convert people, you want to show them something that you can rile them up against to bring them out of their own faith belief system and convert them. So they are going to attempt that here. It's also becoming political because of the race divisions in this society. So you can expect this to happen more and more in the coming generations as our numbers increase in America. It is also something that we need to be cognizant of because there are specific organizations that have been created to do this work. I mean, there is an organization, ironically named Equality Labs.
What's the deal with Equality Labs? I mean, why? What is Equality Labs? I know last week you designated them to be the Hindu hater of the week, but what are they doing about this? Because their name seemed to pop up everywhere.
Well, it is an organization that's an upgraded version of a much cruder project that was attempted by the Christian right wing called Dalitstan.org. That was attempted in the late 90s. That organization's website got banned in India, and it was basically what I usually call fault line fishing. You look for social divisions, you look for historical fault lines, and you pour as much problems and money into it so that you can divide people. So Dalitstand.org was the earlier version of what is now Equality Labs, and it basically just it claims to be a quote unquote Dalit organization, even though it doesn't. All of their workers don't seem to be quote unquote Dalit. How they call themselves Dalit. They even have Islamists amongst them. Uh, so which is quite ironic. But anything that can divide the Hindu Americans and the Indian Americans, they are involved in that. And irony is that when Article 370 was removed in Kashmir, the biggest beneficiary community, one of the biggest beneficiary community of the removal of Article 370 in Kashmir recently, was the quote unquote Dalit community, the lower caste Hindu community, which was being discriminated for the last 60 years in the state of Jammu and Kashmir because of Article 370. And lo and behold, Equality Labs actually opposes the removal of Article 370. So as much as it claims to be quote unquote a Dalit advocacy group, it is basically a fault line fishing group. And it started off as a project of the Christian right wing. It was funded and supported by the Church of South India, which is a Anglican church, and a person named Joshua Samuels was involved in it. And now it is basically anyone who hates India, they will ally with them right now. So it's a sad story of how political divisiveness can be exploited.
And there are other organizations like that on campus, right? So Sadhana, which is which carries the Hindu name and calls itself a Hindu organization, and they brought out a report on a caste as well. And the report basically, it's a very confused report. I don't know how many people have read it, and it's a very confused report because on one hand it says that it starts out with an apology, and then it says that it quotes Bhagavad Gita, and then says that Bhagavad Gita urges equality, and then it goes on and says that, well, but we should theologically repudiate the caste. Well, if caste, if Varna, first of all, they don't acknowledge the difference between Varna and caste. And then, so they intermingle the two. Then they say that Bhagavad Gita, one of the most important scriptures of Hindu Dharma, does not say that the caste, or according to them, caste, we would call it Varna, is based on birth. And then it says that we should vigorously and unequivocally repudiate the caste, theological representation of caste. Well, if it is not there, so I think, and then they don't acknowledge the fact that the word caste is of colonial origin. They don't talk about colonialism at all. They don't talk about the varnashram as outlined in Rigveda. They don't acknowledge the fact that the jati system, which is actually birth based, exists in all societies. And so why do they not acknowledge? And this is the question that was asked earlier as well on the Facebook, that why is it that these we have all these we have all these other countries, especially in Indian subcontinent, but around the world, where they have similar systems. Why are they singling out? Why is Sadhana, a supposed Hindu organization, singling out Hindus?
Well, the thing is that sadhana is the tail wagging the dog situation here. Sadhana was created with the goal of having a token Hindu on the table in the Hindu hate groups, so that they get more legitimacy. We always complain that all these anti-Hindu campaigns are basically run by either Christian right wing or the Islamic right wing, and or the left-wing extremists who form a bridge between these two. Otherwise, these two, the Christian right wing and the Islamic right wing, don't talk to each other. They hate each other much more than they hate us. So the left-wing extremists can kind of become the bridge between them. And sadhana is basically the outcome of that bridge building, where intersection, they have to create a Hindu at the table there, and sadhana is that group. And so sadhana will basically just project what these other groups are saying. And therefore, its message, as you noted, is not going to be cohesive. On one hand, they will try to be Hindu. At the same time, they will be anti-Hindu. So it's you pointed it out. They will quote the Bhagavad Gita saying there is no quote unquote caste discrimination in it, and then they will say we should reject the Hindu theology that calls about caste discrimination. So it's it's a self defeating conversation that they will have. But more importantly, I think we should focus on who are the people behind these groups. I mean, it is important that our audience knows who are the people creating and supporting the groups like Equality Lab and Sadhana, and that's the thing is that they are so brazen because they have not seen any opposition from the Hindu side, that they sometimes don't even hide their actual agendas. And it comes very clearly when you have protests and hearings at the Hill. They just do it brazenly, and that's where the Hindu community needs to come together. We acknowledge our weaknesses. We acknowledge that we are a evolutionary society that has been making efforts over the centuries to evolve and be better, and has been constantly reviving itself, reassuring itself, and revisiting its own faults. At the same time, we need to know that there are vested interests outside our community which are trying to destroy us, and they happen to be the representatives of them in modern times.
And so that is so well articulated. So tell me a little bit more, and I know we are running out of time, but I have to bring this up with Soda. There was a fake survey, and I call it fake because it is not a scientific survey, and it was about, and this non-scientific survey done by Equality Lab and Sadhana and people like that gained a lot of traction. Pamela Jaipal picked it up, was a congresswoman, and other people picked it up. A lot of media coverage. Brandeis University specifically outlawed casteism. What is going on? I mean, how do a non-scientific fake survey done by a vested interest about casteism in America and caste discrimination in America, how did they end up getting so much traction?
Because there are vested interests who are fully interested in exploiting this fault line. It's very clear. And what is important for us to understand is that we should identify the people who are behind these projects, and more importantly, we should talk to our own people. We should share these issues within the community, and we should do a survey about who these people are and what these people think about these projects. We should expose these people through a survey. I would suggest that the World Hindu Council of America or some Hindu organization should do a survey about asking people who do you think is funding Equality Labs, and see what happens. People, it's a free world, and it's a world of free exchange of ideas. They are doing their best to share their narratives and impose their narratives of Hinduism on us, Hindu dharma on us. We do the same. I believe as long as it's an open intellectual playing field, I don't mind dealing with it.
Okay. So that as we conclude our program today, two of our major sections that we acknowledge every week. The first one is Hindu Seva Act of the Week. Utsoda, I want to bring up a Seva Act of the Week that we have in passing talked about in past, but it's really, really important, and we want to talk about it. That is the Hindu priest fund that we have created for COVID-19. It's created by World Hindu Council of America, or VHPA. And as you know, with all the lockdowns, etc., there are a lot of mandirs who are Hindu mandirs, Hindu temples that are locked down. And because they're locked down, people are not visiting the mandirs. When people are not visiting the mandirs, they're not making the financial offerings that they would usually make. And because they're not making the usual offerings, these mandirs are financially suffering, and the impact of that is also on the priests who are serving in these mandirs. To begin with, the priests in the mandirs are not necessarily very rich people. They do perform puja at the mandir. They also go to people's homes and perform pujas, and that income stream also has stopped for them. And I think that for the important role that the priests perform in the Hindu society, we should, come together as a community and support these priests. So I would urge you, if you're watching this program, we have a GoFundMe campaign. You can look for a Hindu Priests Relief Fund on GoFundMe, or you can just go to VHP hyphen America AMERICA .org/donation. That's vhp-america.org/donation. Please go there, contribute whatever you can, even if it's $5, even if it's $10, whatever you can afford, whatever. If you feel like donating, please go and support this Hindu Seva Act of the Week. And finally, Utsavda, I think Akshat Chaturvedi is saying that are we digressing from the topic? No, Akshat, we are not. I think that for today, we have completed the topic of caste and America. This is a very large topic, as Mahendra Bhai said earlier. We will be continuing on this topic in a future show, but you would be very interested in knowing what Utsavda has picked as the Hindu hater of the week. Utsavda, the big reveal for which a lot of people just stay tuned. So, who is the Hindu hater of the week?
Well, I'll thank Akshat and Abhishek because they had two questions that I would answer in one line before we end. But the Hindu hater of the week, let me take that first. So, a bunch of radical activists took upon themselves the responsibility of vandalizing the statue of Mahatma Gandhi in Washington, D.C. And they did it so cowardly under the garb of Black Lives Matter. So the Hindu hater of the week are those radical activists who took the cover of Black Lives Matter movement to defile and deface the statue of Mahatma Gandhi in Washington, D.C. And I need to note that the next day, a Jamaat-e-Islami front group named, Stand with Kashmir was bragging about it on their Instagram account. So whoever these guys are, I'm not saying that they are Jamaat-e-Islami activists or Stand with Kashmir activists. Whoever these guys are the Hindu haters of the week. And it gives us all the more reasons to share the message of Mahatma Gandhi with the community and promote healing amongst all Americans.
And Utsavda, Abhishek has said so very true. Akshat has said very well said, Utsav Chakrabarti, and thanks. And he's saying thanks for calling them out.
Akshat had pointed out to answer. He had said that why amongst other religious groups also in the Indian subcontinent there is discrimination on the basis of jati, and as we now call them caste. So that's because, as I mentioned in the conversation before, Akshat, it's the institutionalization of the discrimination that got ingrained amongst all the religious community based on their profession, because there was lack of mobility, upward mobility amongst professions during the colonial period. And it transcends religion. It's amongst the Muslims, it's amongst the Christians. It's even more glaring amongst the Muslims and Christians because their burial grounds are separate sometimes, most often than not. And at least Hindus don't bury, and we go to the same funeral pyre in the same place. So that is the answer to your question. It is institutionalized because of the social colonial strata that came over us over the last 1,000 years. And to answer Abhishek's question about why Hindus don't talk about these issues, is it because we don't know about our scriptures? I would agree with that. I would agree that most Hindus, because of the way education was looked at in the Indian subcontinent, because most Hindus who come to America are, in general around the world, 90% of the Hindus are born in the Indian subcontinent. The education systems in India, which claims to be a secular country, has been completely de-Hinduized. In Pakistan and Bangladesh, especially in Bangladesh, where there's a huge Hindu community, it's Islamic education. So Hindus barely know anything about their own traditions, and whatever they know is taught to them in a very negative way. So we don't know about Hindu Dharma. we don't have institutions anymore that can teach about Hindu Dharma and that has the Hindu gaze at its own history, at its own science, at its own culture and practices and theology and philosophy. It's something we are trying to revive. It's something that I personally consider very close to my heart. I do my best to study in my free time. I urge everybody else to do it. We have been privileged to live in America. We have been privileged to have the resources to support ourselves. We should make the most of it. We are the tip of the spear when it comes to this intellectual process.
Very well said, Utsoda. But I do want to make one point before we go, and that is the desecration of Mahatma Gandhi's statue is the biggest affront or insult to Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King has acknowledged that he got inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, I have visited just recently, a few months ago before the lockdown, I visited the MLK Center, as I talked about last time, in Atlanta. There is a whole room dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi over there. There's a statue of Mahatma Gandhi, and for someone to use Black Lives Matter as a disguise to desecrate Mahatma Gandhi's statue is a biggest insult to Black Lives Matters movement, because it is going against the very inspiration, or one of the many inspirations, that Martin Luther King Jr. himself had. And that shows that people who are rioting and people who are looting and people who are desecrating the statue, at least a portion of them or a lot of them had a very different agenda than what Black Lives Matter had, or what people who were genuinely seeking justice and equality for African Americans in America.
Absolutely true, Ajay bhai. And not to mention Nelson Mandela, the inspiration behind South Africa's freedom movement.
Yep.
Completely and fully inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's efforts. So it's sad, but it's true, and we have to call it out. We have to call it out, and we have to highlight it to the community, because it's important to bring the community together at this point. Yep. There's no use going on doing violence.
Thank you very much, Utsoda. I know we went over quite a bit today, but it was really important topic. And I think our experiment of involving our viewers in the program, I thought was very helpful. And I'm so glad that we were able to involve we are learning, as everyone knows, we are just evolving as a show. But I want to thank everyone who joined today, everyone who commented today, and we promise to bring you even a better program next week. So thank you, Utsoda, and namaste, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. And feel free to criticize us and share our video with people who don't like us and want to criticize us. We want to make ourselves better. We want to make the world a better place. So be critical of us and share it with people who don't like us.
Thank you. Namaste.